I will just do like a formal thank you to everyone who's here and who is going to be joining soon. We're expecting about 100 people. So, this is going to get big, but I feel like everyone here knows what Saja is and who we are, but one thing that you probably don't know right now is that we're offering free memberships this year because of the situation, with the pandemic and everything that's going on. So please go ahead and become members. You'll have an entire year of free memberships. Also, please mark your calendars for October the 3rd. We have our annual awards ceremony that day, which will also include an all-day conference. So, it would be great to see all of you there. And yeah, that's, I think, in terms of just about Saja, that's about it. But welcome to the panel. Everybody knows everybody here, I presume. We know the panelists. Mitra Kalita is the Senior Vice President for News, Opinion and Programming for CNN Digital. She has been in editorial positions at the LA Times, Quartz in the Wall Street Journal, and she's a longtime Saja member and also the former Saja president. Alan Henry is the service editor at Wired. He was previously the Smarter Living editor at the New York Times. And he wrote the viral New York Times article on how to succeed when you're marginalized or discriminated against at work, which has led him to write a book on the subject. So that's exciting. And moderating this panel is another longtime Saja member and someone who's particularly suited to moderate this discussion. Rakhi Mirchandani, who is the editorial director, diversity and inclusion at Dow Jones, and the author of one of the best children's books called Super Satya Saves the Day. So looking forward to that. Before I hand over to Rakhi, just a few housekeeping tips. We're keeping the panelists audio muted, but we will have a Q&A at the end of this discussion. So make sure you're sending your questions either to Rakhi or everyone else in the chat box. She will take them up either during the conversation or towards the end. So definitely keep the questions coming. And yeah, I'll just hand it over to Rakhi now.
Awesome. Thanks, Prerna. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining. I am going to, we'll kick off super quickly, but I'll just give you a quick Zoom kind of housekeeping rules here. There are not a ton of rules. We want to leave a ton of time for questions. So we'll take a break around 6:30 for questions. Feel free to utilize the chat box for your questions. So if you think about something, you don't want to forget it, you can go ahead and pop it in there. If I can get to it in real time, I will. Otherwise, at 6:30, we'll take a break. We'll ask some questions. If there aren't any, I'll keep going. Nobody wants that. Ask questions. I'm also going to put my cell phone number in the chat box. You can use it if you want to anonymize your question. Maybe it's about you or your workplace. Feel free to text me your question. I won't have your number in my phone. I won't know who you are. And if I do, I won't tell anybody. And you can use it to send me your questions or memes. So there you go. That's my cell phone number. And that should be it. We're all Zoom experts at this point. So I'm gonna ask you, do the usual, mute yourselves, turn your cameras on. It's way more fun to look at your faces than your names or your code names. So throw that camera on. I'm in my pajamas. It's all good. We all are. Cool. Well, great. Let's get started. So I guess to create some warmth in this Zoom room, my friends, let's do a little rapid fire before we kick off. What do you think? Mitra, Alan, you game? All right. Awesome. Easy stuff. Easy stuff. Ready? Okay. Alan, you go first. Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok?
Instagram, for sure.
Mitra?
Facebook.
Oh. Indian matchmaking or Tiger King?
Neither. I haven't seen either. I'm awful.
I've seen both. I'm going to say Indian matchmaking, but my mother, Indian auntie that she is Tiger King.
Best part about quarantine?
Working from bed.
Spending time with my kids.
Worst part about quarantine, that would have been mine, Mitra.
Not leaving my apartment for 5 months.
I would say spending time with my kids.
Print or digital?
Digital.
Digital.
What are you reading right now?
Can I go second?
Actually, I just started
Or listening to?
No, I just started reading The Water Dancer, so I have an answer for a change.
I like it.
Yeah.
I'm finishing, what's the name of her book? Charlie Jane Anders' sci-fi novel that she's like my best friend, and I feel awful for forgetting her book.
This is recorded. This is recorded.
Oh no!
Not great for you right now,
I
Alan.
know,
Not great.
not doing so good here.
New Taylor Swift album or Beyonce's visual album, Black is King?
Oh, Beyonce, Black is King.
+1.
+2. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. So let's just hop on in. All right, friends. I feel like we're ready. Our Zoom room is very full.
City in the Middle of the Night. That was the book.
There you go. City in the Middle of the Night. Thank you. So let's hop on in. Alan, you're literally writing a book about this panel topic, which is super exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And as per the book announcement, productivity without privilege is how to succeed when you're a marginalized person in your space, especially when the usual sort of like productivity advice doesn't work for you. So can we just get a level start on a couple of things from both of you? Can you first explain to me what being a marginalized person is? What does that mean?
I mean, to me, being a marginalized person is just having some identity or some factor of your identity that isn't represented by the majority in whatever environment you're in. So, I mean, long before I was in journalism, I was a project manager. I was the only Black person in our IT department. So, you know, I had a different approach to things. But like, when I moved into journalism, suddenly I was also this only Black person in that, or in my organization. And like, you know, those things, it comes with some certain level of discomfort when you're all by yourself and have no one to talk to. So, I mean, and it doesn't have to be about ethnicity either. Like for me, when I was pitching the book, they asked me specifically, like, well, what about women in the workplace? And I'm like, well, yes, I want to talk to women who can share their experiences about being the only woman or being saddled with a certain kind of work. Well, what about, you know, being LGBTQ in the workplace? Yes, also, you know, any group of people that have kind of a collective identity that aren't represented by the superstructure, that counts to me as marginalized.
Awesome. Mitra?
So I would agree with Alan. The only thing I've been thinking about is to somehow center power more. So I've been thinking that marginalized could include people who feel like they're not in the core decision-making group of an organization, which actually could include white people, it could include young people, it could include people who are not managers. I think for the purposes of this conversation, I'm largely defining it as in the way that Alan did, but I've been thinking a lot in this more recent movement, if you will, about how even those of us who came of age within certain power structures are being challenged by folks who are way more marginalized than we are by virtue of not having power. So
Yes.
I'm glad you're asking us to level set, because I'll try to be specific as we're talking. And if I'm not, feel free to challenge me on it, because I see some of my colleagues from CNN here, and certainly they do that every day.
I love it. Yes. And you can feel free to do that in the chat, or you can text me however you want to do it. Unmute yourself, do your thing. And for the purposes also of this conversation, we're talking about, well, we'll talk about sort of like how can marginalized groups succeed, right? Like tips for success and actual tactical things folks can do. And I'd like to know a little bit about what success has looked like for both of you. Like, when did you look around and you're like, damn, you know what? I'm successful. What did that look like to you? How did you know?
I mean, I have Indian parents, so I feel like I'm not successful. I mean, like nothing
I get it.
do is good enough. So I just want to put that out there, that you might think you publish a book, not good enough. The New York Times reviews your book, not good enough. You know, you get married, that should do it, still not good enough. So I think, and now I think there is a part of that never good enough that actually is a motivational factor, right?
Fuels the fire, right?
It really does. God, there's a fire. So, however, I would say that it's come in so many stages of my life where there were reminders of how far we've come, right? And I do say that we, whether it's, you know, my family and their journey, whether it's South Asians in media, whether it's someone like me who gets to have the team and the office and the privileges that I do, whether it's awards, like, I mean, I feel like there are reminders all the time of how lucky I've been. And that it's not even like a recent thing. I mean, there were a few years where I felt like, oh, I used to be like, you know, I used to be on the front page all the time. Like the middle of your career is pretty hard, but like even those middle years I was pretty lucky, I
mean, I agree completely, but like also I am saddled with a terrible case of imposter syndrome. So like I never feel like I'm actually successful. I mean, I was editor-in-chief of a small publication. You think that would be great? No, that wasn't great. I left that publication. I went to the New York Times. Wow, I work at the New York Times. That should be great, right? No, it's not that actually. And now, I mean, and the worst part is every time you change jobs or change roles or change positions, you then have to look back at yourself and say, was I really successful? If I was successful, wouldn't I still be doing the thing that I was doing? Or wouldn't I be just better at the thing I was doing before? So yeah, it's not even a factor for me.
It's funny you say that, and sort of like how the marker changes, right? The marker of what success looks like for us will continue to change. And that's an interesting thing. I see people nodding, like I feel that deeply. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your book and the New York Times column that inspired it, which is, what is the usual productivity advice that you're referring to, and why doesn't it work for marginalized folks?
So a lot of it is stuff that, and I've been guilty of this too. I mean, when I worked at Lifehacker for ages, and you know, we're a productivity blog, and just traded in those kinds of tips, right? So block out an entire day as your no meeting Tuesday. Like that's so you can focus on deep work on its surface, on its face. That sounds like a great idea, right? But not everyone carries the same kind of social baggage into the workplace that everyone else does. So if I did that and I started declining people's meetings for next Tuesday, saying, I can't make it, it's my no meeting Tuesday, depending on who that person is, they're going to look at me and be like, who is this guy? And why does he get to say that he doesn't come to my meeting? And I mean, if you are a woman of color who does the same thing, suddenly you have to deal with the social baggage that comes with that. You're sassy, you're fiery, you're aggressive, you're hard to work with. And so when especially at Lifehacker, when we used to publish those kinds of things way back in the day, this was mid-aughts, right? We didn't think about the social considerations that came with it, partially because it was a bunch of white guys and one black guy who was on staff there. And we didn't have anybody to tell us otherwise. No one to say, hey, if I did this, that I'd get fired. If a commenter told us that, we'd be like, oh yeah, okay, well then don't do it. But we didn't think of the broader social implications. So like, that's just one example of productivity advice that doesn't really fly for everyone. But things like, oh, you should really lean in and negotiate your salary and like make the case to your boss for your promotions and your benefits and everything. That's all well and good if your boss is going to look at you and your work based on your merits. And if you have a great boss who's willing to do that, fantastic. If you don't, or you have a boss that looks at you based on their stereotypical beliefs of your culture or your background or your gender, ethnicity, or representation, then of course that's not going to work for you the way that it would for a white person or a white man. So that's just not going to fly. And that was kind of, I didn't realize it myself until I ran into that, where I was starting to do the same things that a lot of my peers were doing. And I realized that I was being treated differently because of it. And I would talk to my peers, well, I made this case. What do you think? Oh yeah, that's perfectly reasonable. Well, the executive editor or CEO that I made the case to suddenly thought that that wasn't good enough. I needed to work harder. I was somehow lazy. I just didn't have the same go-getter entrepreneurial attitude as my white colleagues did. And I didn't realize that's where it came from, but that's where it came from.
Yeah, you know, and that idea of like the rules being different for different folks, that's a real thing. Like so many people on this call have experienced it. I certainly have. I know Mitra has, like we've talked about it at different points in my career. Mitra, did you want to add anything to that? I could see you like.
No, I think, I mean, you know, what really came to my mind, Alan, as you were talking was methods of communication and like how, for example, corporate culture requires presentation, right? There's presentation culture, there's PowerPoint culture, there's how do you carry yourself in the room? There are people who, you all know them, who will talk and the room is like mesmerized and you're like, they're so smart, but then when you leave, you're like, what did they just say and what do they do, right? So I was nodding because as you were talking, Alan, I was just kind of picturing the way we work, right? And what is acceptable and promotable within the way we work and how that's being challenged right now. So that's why I had that look on my face.
I often have that look on my face when I leave a meeting and I've nodded along the whole time and then I'm like, what are these words I wrote down? They're not even real. Like they don't make sense in sequence.
What just happened? Did I agree to something?
I think we're sort of in the neighborhood of two terms that I wanted to bring up today that I'm sure have come up in your workplaces or in conversation with friends, which is sort of microaggressions and allyship. I know that it's like they've been tossed around a ton, especially I want to say like in the last few months, in the last year certainly. And I wanted to talk through a little bit around allyship at the individual level and then also like within the corporate structure. So Mitra, I know you've been talking about diversity for so long at this point that I think you recently said like, I don't even do panels on diversity anymore, I won't do it. Obviously we'll do it for Saja because we'll do anything for Saja. But I feel you, right? Because these conversations have been happening for such a long time. Yeah. And so I wanted to talk through with you your thoughts on how we forged Black and Brown solidarity in the workplace, Black and Brown allyship, and what are the specific things that people can do and what it looks like in practice.
So just a note on the diversity panels, I'll do anything for Saja, that's true. I do want to share that over the last few months, and of course the lawnmower is going by right now. I'm so sorry, you guys.
It's all good.
But something happened where after literally decades of talking about this issue, I just shut down. Like I was asked to do, I mean, I've been asked to do a lot of panels where it's finally promised there will be white executives, there will be white leaders in the audience. And for some reason, I've just shut down. And I was like kind of quiet about it. And then I think what you're referring to, Rocky, was like one day where I was like, I just can't do these anymore. Yeah. Because it feels like I've been there for so long. And now people are kind of coming in and I'm like, this is my life's work.
That's right.
It's not just about an organization or allyship. I mean, this is literally what my life stands for. And now you want me to come and explain that to you? Like it just felt really distilled and transactional. And I was trying to understand the source of my discomfort because on the one hand, for many of us, it's like, we've been fighting for this for so long. And then people come along and they say, we want to fight with you. And that's when you shut down. Like, I felt like, wait, am I doing the wrong thing? So I just want to voice that because my guess is other people are going through versions of that, right?
Yes.
By virtue of being in this organization, it's clearly your identity and what you bring to journalism is clearly something you care about and think about. I would rewind on the notion of allyship and Black and Brown solidarity in the workplace and kind of get to the life stage before we solve the newsroom. So, you know, thankfully, I was raised by parents who have, you know, James Baldwin in like every room in our house and every bookshelf. And so I say that as a way that osmosis and how you are conducting your life and what your living room looks like and what your wedding list looks like and what your children's dolls and books look like actually really matter. And I don't think you can create solidarity in a newsroom unless you've examined your own life and really committed that life to understanding this. And I didn't, you know, it's only recently that this term anti-racism has become in vogue. But I kind of think about actions like the ones that I'm talking about,
Yeah.
as literally a way of being, right?
Yes.
And I think that if you're going to try to create any change in your newsroom, for those of us who bring our identity to the newsroom, there's a necessity to learn, to listen, to read, and then to act in the ways that you feel like are almost exemplary. And I don't mean that in like a school marmy way, but I mean, you know, you got to embody it. And then I would say that there are other like concrete things, like Saja just said that it's free this year for membership. Well, maybe you should take what you would have spent on membership and become a member of NABJ or NAHJ. Are you immersing yourself in others' experiences and others' spaces with a desire to understand or to tell stories or to again, I keep coming back to understand, because there's such an element of just immersing yourself and being open to it that comes before acting. And then the last thing I would say is to actually be intentional about wanting to create that solidarity. There is nothing wrong with being in a newsroom and saying, you know, should we have a Slack channel for the brown and black people? Should we do, like, there are things like that where you can create spaces and the answer might just be you creating the space instead of kind of waiting. I think that there's a little bit of like host the party and others might actually show up to it. Literally have a party too, if you can.
I mean, not at this current moment, the Slack brute is the operative word here, but yes.
But you know.
But yes. No, and I think creating that space, whether it's a Slack channel or just like a group of folks like gathering like this, right? This stuff is critical. This is not performative. This is mission critical, is gathering and connecting. But also that introspection piece, right? Like taking stock before like rushing out to solve that's deep, Mitra. That's beautiful. I know Alan wanted to hop in there, so go right ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to piggyback on that notion of like, you know, if your journalistic organization has like free membership and you take that money and go spend it on another organization. That was difficult for me for a long time because I had this internalized belief that these spaces are just for these people. And that's not true. And it took me a while to learn that as I got into journalism. And I really wish I could tell more people to normalize being uncomfortable in someone else's space, because that's when you learn the most. And so like I have been in NAHJ meetings and I am like, I don't understand anything that's going on right now, but I'm so glad I'm here. Because I meet people and I meet people who are covering the same things I'm covering or want to write about things that I am assigning. And I'm not just like expanding my network, which is great for my career and all, but like I'm also making new friends and I'm also learning about people that I would never have met before at all. And that all it takes is being able to get over that small barrier of being slightly uncomfortable and slightly unknowledgeable in an unfamiliar space. And that's something that, I mean, I think a lot of people just don't want to do. Everybody hates making things awkward. So, but once you get over letting yourself be awkward for a minute, the benefits are right there in front of you.
Yeah, and I think we talk about that like success at the individual level. We were talking about this a little bit before we started, right? We like focus in on that success at the individual level. There are all these other things that are going on around us that you miss or you haven't paid attention to or like didn't really creep into your life before. And so just putting ourselves in those groups together and those spaces together is definitely an easy thing that everybody can do like tomorrow. This is not a thing that you have to wait for a corporate structure to approve and go through a million emails and all of that kind of stuff. Alan, we were chatting briefly earlier about sort of what managers or people who claim to be allies, like what we could do, with them in this space, and what can people in positions of authority do to help others, folks who are hiring, and help others like diversify upper management. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was just talking to somebody today who's hiring for a position. They're like, what can I do to diversify my candidate pool other than at writers of color on Twitter. And I'm just like, come the hell on, really? Like, if that's even a thing that you're thinking is a checkbox you should cross off, then you're already way, way behind. I mean, one thing obviously people in power can do is step aside for one, but not just step aside for the sake of it. Like, step aside and bring up people who are qualified and have ideas, and allow them to bring their whole selves to the role that they are vacating. Or and I'm not talking about mentorships, because mentorships are great, but they're so often used as an excuse to just train or let someone shadow you a little bit and then write them off and say, okay, now go back to the trenches and do your thing. I'm talking about like actually saying, hey, we're going to do a search for this position, but I'd really appreciate it if you put your hat in the ring, because I know that you have the skills required to do this job. And if you don't, then talk to me and we can talk about what skills you need to get to this level. I've never heard that from a manager or an executive editor before. And I have turned around and told freelance writers that have written for me, they're like, well, how do I get a full-time writing gig? I'm like, well, here's the skills that got me the jobs that I have. Maybe you should cultivate those skills, and I can help you if it works in this kind of freelance editor relationship. So that's one thing that I think a lot of people can do. Another thing is to allow people especially people who are marginalized in the workplace, to kind of come out of their shell a little bit. One of the most brilliant meetings I've ever been in was one where the loudest person in the room was dominating the conversation and kind of took all of the big glamour projects for himself and everything. And then the person who was running that meeting, who's now, I think, the editor of book development at the New York Times, she's wonderful, turned to me in that meeting and said, hey, Alan, you've been really quiet. What do you think? And that meant the world to me. Just turning, not so much putting me on the spot, but saying, hey, I also value your expertise, I value your opinion, and I value the fact that you belong in this room too. So this guy's done a lot of talking, let's hear from you now. I think really more managers that want to claim themselves as allies should really, really take a page from that. But yeah, I've seen it in management guidebooks, but I only maybe once or twice seen it in real life.
I've witnessed that in a meeting too. And I remember the moment that it happened, because I'm a talker. And so like I can be the dominator, and I've had to learn how to not do that and give myself permission to shut up every now and again. And when that happens and you realize that like there are folks at the table, or even like in this virtual world, who haven't gotten a word in, who have things to say, and like, how do you make the space for everybody? That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's so, I know exactly what that feels like.
Feels good. Feels
It
real
does.
good.
It sure does. And when you watch it in action, you're like, man, this is a thing of beauty right here. So I promised everyone at 6:30 that we would take a quick sort of check for questions. So I want to keep my promise. Does anybody have any questions? The way to do it is either to post it in the chat or just unmute yourself and go right in. So I do this thing where I count to 15, and if no one asks, by the time I count to 15, then we don't have any questions. So I'll keep going then. All right. So earlier, Mitra and Alan, when we were chatting, you both mentioned different points where either you had said something, but someone else had sort of like said the same thing and gotten the accolades for it, or we've been in those situations before. And actually someone had sent me this on Twitter, this question earlier today, so I do want to ask it to you both, is what do you do when that happens in the moment? Whether it happens directly to you or it's happening around you towards other marginalized folks, what do you do?
So I think it's okay to call it out. I really do. And we're actually in a moment in the workplace where when you call it out, it's not just about the credit for the idea. It's so clearly about more than that, that it starts to have people think about their behaviors in meetings, right? It can get a little jokey. Like I've been in the exact situation you're talking about, and when someone will be like, well, actually, I said that. And I think it's a great way to kind of turn it around and then have a moment. And you got to hold the moment a little bit to make sure that credit is going where it's due. I also do, this won't surprise you, Rocky, but I spend like a good chunk of my day just sitting there and coming up with comebacks. Like I just have them ready to go, right? And so when I was president of Saja, anytime there was like a Saja meeting or a Saja board event or a Saja convention, inevitably someone in the newsroom would say, well, what about the White Journalists Association? Ha ha ha, right?
Right.
It's like you just would hear, and
Totally.
And so my response was always, that's called our masthead, right? Or that's the whole newsroom, or that's the morning meeting, or, you know, whatever version of that. And there would be a pause because it's always like, is she serious? And those of you who know me know, of course
She is.
So I think there's also now you have to be someone who you are. Like that's in my personality. That might not be in everybody's personality type to like just joke around about oppression in that way, right? But that's just sort of how I've gotten through 20 plus years in a newsroom.
Yeah. I mean, again, like that's like a super tactical thing that I would also do, but that has to be in your personality. Like that would be a stretch for some folks, and that makes sense. And there's other versions of that we can talk through also if that's helpful. Alan, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm a super non-confrontational person,
I feel you.
and like I talked to my therapist about this like 3 times, because one of the worst meetings I just talked about one of the best meetings. One of the worst meetings I was ever in was we were getting to know a bunch of people. I talked about, this was at the New York Times again, and I was talking about the role of our team and where I fit in. And I was like, oh yeah, so I edit these articles and I commission these freelancers and this is kind of my niche and everything. And then another one of my colleagues came into the meeting late, didn't have a chance to hear what I'd said, sat down, and when he introduced himself as not just my boss, but the essential overarching manager for our team. I edit all the articles. I commission all the freelancers. So everyone in that room knew patently that that was false. But looking around the room, no one said anything. So now it's all on me to kind of stand up for my own kind of territory or my own expertise. I did nothing. I did absolutely nothing because I just couldn't. So there's 2 ways to handle that, right? If you're the kind of person who can stand up for yourself in the moment, by all means do it. If you're not, if you're like me, then the next thing you have to do is play the long game and go around and kind of get coffee with the people that you were talking to in the meeting, the person who started it, or, you know, you have to stretch your own comfort zone to go and go to somebody else's meeting and make friends with the people that were in there to talk to them about more of what you do. And that frankly was a lot of my experience in large media organizations, was spending time getting coffee after and around other meetings to clarify what was missaid in bigger meetings. And it's awful, but it's the only way to do it if you don't feel comfortable calling somebody out in the moment.
And sometimes we're both those people at different points in the same week, right? Like you can be both those people. Often, like, things will happen around me, whether it's in my life or at work, and you're like, oh, I should have said this, but I didn't. There is still a way to go back and say the things that need to be said. It's not like you had only one shot. Like, it's not Hamilton.